Welcome back to BadgerBlitz TV, your Rivals.com destination for all things Wisconsin athletics. Back after a little break, I'm Matt Perkins, joined by BadgerBlitz.com editor-in-chief, publisher, insider extraordinaire, John McNamara. Great to see you as always, man.
Great to see you as well, man.
Yeah, it's been a minute. We apologize for that, but it is prime recruiting season, so we can't let the opportunity escape us to talk about a whole lot of stuff that happened on campus this past weekend. I know the Badgers have been racking up the amount of guys that they got in there this past weekend, especially a lot of high priority targets. And as we record here on Monday at about 11 a.m. Central, we have seen two commitments for the Badgers of visitors this weekend. Let's start with the more surprising one. That's Logan Powell, the offensive lineman out of Arizona. John, you actually just had a really great story come out on him, talking to his coach, I think just a couple hours ago here this morning. But this one definitely kind of came out of the blue for a lot of people who've been following the Badgers, especially given his offers. Got places like Alabama wanted him, but it seems like Coach Blazek put it over the top with just emphasizing something we've seen for years, and that's family around Wisconsin and this idea of Wisconsin being a family program. John, A, how surprised were you when you heard the news? And B, what does this mean for both this class and going forward?
Yeah, there were a handful of guys that coming into this week, and I thought Wisconsin had a pretty good shot at. And I'll be honest, Logan Powell wasn't on that initial list for me. So, his commitment was a little bit of a surprise because he was scheduled to see Arizona, which is the in-state school and the school that his brother plays tight end for, and then Alabama later in the month too, which obviously national powerhouse. They recruit fairly well. So, to get that commitment, just in general, I think is a great get. Now, to get it before, him taking those other two officials, I think is even more surprising. But like you talked about, Matt, I got a chance to talk to his head coach, and he mentioned that connection that he had to Coach Blazek, and it dates back to his time in Western Illinois and Jason Jewell's time at Glendale Community College. He sent some guys to Western Illinois, and then when Blazek took over at Wisconsin, he said, "Hey, look, I got a guy for you that you might be able to get." He's heavily recruited, and he had 30 plus offers. But the connection that Blazek made with not only Logan but his family was extremely valuable, and it produced a commitment this weekend. And talked about your question of how does it affect this class? Well, you have two tackles coming in Roski and Cam Clark, and now you have an interior guy in Powell, and that allows them to be a little bit more selective moving forward. Not to get too far ahead, but looking at that next weekend, Hardy Watts would be a great way to fill out this offensive line class for Wisconsin. He'd pair very nicely with Powell as an interior prospect for the Badgers.
Yeah, we'll talk about Cam Clark, which is an interesting name, I think, to talk about just in this class a little bit later. Because since we last talked, we've seen a couple other commitments that I want to talk about later. But I think that this is a huge win for Wisconsin, and for all of our subscribers at BadgerBlitz. If you've been in the message boards, there was a poll. What was more important, Stroud or Powell as a commit? I think a lot of people are saying Stroud, but I'm actually going to say Powell on this one, John, because we've already seen that Coach Fick and that staff can recruit D-backs like nothing we've ever seen before. So it's almost become commonplace to see four-star D-backs coming to Madison now. The offensive line recruiting has been a little bit more up and down in some ways, especially with needing to get a lot of 5 players in the 2024 class, I should say. And so I think this Powell commitment is a bigger impact in a lot of ways. Not to say, though, that Rukeem Stroud is not a big impact, because, another 4-star playmaker on the defensive backfield out of the state of Florida, John. Stroud was one of the top guys on their board. How do you think he fits in the 3-3-5? Is he going to be a nickel guy? Is he going to be a boundary guy? Is he going to be a guy that moves, around generic defensive back to safety? How do you see him being used? And sort of what do you think put Wisconsin over the top for him?
Yeah, Like you talked about, a couple of years ago, I guess you'd never envision yourself talking about multiple 4-star cornerbacks committing to Wisconsin, and Luke Fickell's got a good chunk of them just in the short time that he's been here. So they add another 4-star to the mix, and Rukeem Stroud, and he's a guy I put a future cast in for. A couple days before his official visit, he essentially had things down to Wisconsin and South Florida. The visit that he took in May, I think, really got things going for Wisconsin in the right direction, and obviously kind of put them in the driver's seat there. In terms of where he fits, I think the common theme with these corners and these safeties and these kind of just defensive backs is the versatility. He's a guy that could probably play in the slot, but that length that he brings, even though he's 5'11", 170 pounds, kind of slight, he's a longer kid. So I think he could play some boundary cornerback for you if that's what they needed him to do. But I think he can move around to a few different spaces if, just kind of as needed, how this class kind of fills out here. But, to go back to your, Powell versus Stroud question, and it was just, something to keep the conversation churning. I would tend to agree with you, because if you look at Wisconsin's cornerback board, there were 9 or 10 guys going into this month where Wisconsin had them lined up for officials. Now, some of those guys are going to come off the list because Stroud is coming in, and maybe they get a few other guys in the next couple of days here or into the next weekend. But Wisconsin's board at offensive line was a little bit skinnier, less available. If you missed out on Powell, you probably have to maybe put another offer or two out there. Had they missed on Stroud, I think they had a nice collection of guys, and that they could have turned to, guys who have already locked in official visits. So, to finish off, that's a real credit to Paul Haynes and, Pat Lambert as well, for kind of setting the table for Wisconsin to be, having a lot of options available for them in the month of June. And obviously Stroud was atop their board, and they were able to close him out this past weekend.
Yeah, that was, again, impressive, but it's becoming old hat at this point, which is one of the most shocking things that I can think of, having, been following this team for a quarter century now. That, 4-star quarterbacks are just going to kind of show up and be there and be like, yeah, of course, this is where I want to go. Like, where else would I want to be? But there were, a lot of other big names here that were on campus this past weekend. Trey Poteet, Jaden Woods, Pete Drack, I'm never going to be able to pronounce his last name. I'm sorry. Among other guys, John and Mason Posa obviously has been probably the guy atop their big board for a long time. He was on campus. So, John, I guess the first thing I'm going to ask you, how many more visitors from this weekend do you think end up committing to Wisconsin?
That's a good question. I think you'll see some. Not a ton, not this big wave. So I think you'll see some in the next day or two, and then you could see some later in June and into July as well. A lot of these guys, well, I would say all of them, have more official visits lined up, and not everyone pops on their first official. So just because you don't see it this week doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And when I did the 5 questions heading into the month of June, you go back to Wisconsin's first weekend last year, and I think they hit on 10 of the 12 guys that they had for that first weekend. Now that dropped down to 8 because
2 guys decommitted.
Woodward flipped to Illinois, and then they kind of parted ways with Kamir Prescott. So obviously a small kind of sample size there, but Wisconsin did excellent, last year in that first weekend. And I kind of expect it to be, similar results this year because, they've lined up a lot of their top talent. I think they'll be able to close a good chunk of it out. So we'll have to see how the dominoes kind of fall here. Guys will take more visits, but I do think that this first weekend will prove to be very successful. Once we're looking at this class, maybe in a month or so.
Yeah, I could definitely see at least 4 more guys from this weekend ending up at Wisconsin. But again, a lot of other official visits for a lot of these guys to take. But so moving forward to the second weekend of officials, who should Badger fans keep their eyes out on? Who do you think are the biggest names or most important visitors for Wisconsin the second weekend in June as it stands right now? We know plans change a little bit, but as it stands right now, who do you anticipate being sort of, the big guys to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think you look at the running back position. That's going to be a focal spot with Javin Gordon and Byron Lewis coming on campus. So they're arguably their top two remaining targets at running back. They want to take one. Lewis is one of the better running backs in the country. Everything that you kind of get from people that maybe know his recruitment a little bit better than people on the outside is that there's a big draw to stay in the state of Florida. Miami's a big player for him. Florida State's a big player for him. But if he does leave the state, it will likely be Wisconsin. And they had him up in February. They're going to have him up again this past weekend. So this upcoming weekend. So this is not like a shot in the dark or something that's totally unrealistic. There's real legit interest there, and obviously there's probably 50 schools vying for officials from him. So for Wisconsin to get him up, this upcoming weekend, I think is huge. And then, Javin Gordon is certainly not as heavily recruited, but he's a guy. When they offered, I said, I've never heard of this guy. And then you pop on the tape, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I don't want to make it seem like he's a consolation prize, because Wisconsin has elevated him above some other 4-star kids out there that may have more offers and more publicity and whatever goes on in their recruitment. But they view him as a pretty critical piece for them in this class. So if they came away and they were to get one of the two, they would be pretty happy. And then beyond those guys, there's a handful of other guys that they're looking at. Eugene Hilton, they would love to add him to that wide receiver class.
A lot of schools would love to add Eugene Hilton to their wide receiver class,
without a doubt. And there's talk of can Wisconsin go? Will they go 2 receivers? Will they go 3 receivers? They love to go Tankara and then Eugene Hilton and call it a class. A lot of work to do still there, but we'll see what happens. Maxwell Roy, big 4-star defensive tackle coming from Philadelphia. We talked about Hardy Watts. I don't know that they'll need. Well, shouldn't say that. There's some good guys that they're still penciled in. I just think that some stuff could potentially happen this weekend that could affect what happens this following weekend.
Yeah, you talk about Javin Gordon, and you talked about putting on the tape with him, and he's someone who really pops to me. Like I'm still shocked that he's a mid 3-star, like a 5.5, 5.6 on Rivals, because I watch a lot of running back tape because I just enjoy watching running backs and offensive linemen. I've been very vocal about that in the past. And he has my favorite trait in running backs, and that's balance. Like he has outstanding balance. And to me, that's probably the first thing that I look for when I'm looking at running backs. And I really, really like the way he's able to, he has great balance. He changes direction really well. He has, a good initial burst. And I think he is someone that could be, it's going to be tough to be a day one impact player with the 3 freshmen that they brought in this past class, and the growth of Nate White, who's someone I know you've talked about a fair bit, John. Someone who's sort of a dark horse or a sleeper to see some significant reps here this fall. But Gordon is a kid that I don't think you can pass up on at all. Like I really, really like him as a player.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think he fits that offense well. With all the things that you kind of mentioned, that vision is there too. And, he's put up some pretty gaudy numbers in Georgia. I don't know that he's in like a hotbed of Georgia necessarily, but like I said, I think Wisconsin would be very, very happy if he was their running back in this 2025 class.
Definitely. Well, let's talk about a couple more guys from this 2025 class that have committed over the past couple weeks. I think some of them caught us a little bit by surprise, and some of them didn't. But we'll work sort of, I guess, from the furthest back I'm going to go here is Grant Dean. Grant Dean's recruitment did not take very long. And I think a lot of that is based on the fact that you watch this kid on the track and you're like, oh, okay, I see that athleticism, because he can absolutely burn. What do you run? 10.7, 10.6, something like that, John?
He was a 10-8 guy, I believe.
10-8. I don't.
Emmerich went 10-6.
That's what it was.
I think he went 10-6-8. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
either way, 10-8 for
fast.
a guy for his size and his playing ability is a really nice addition, John. He should be starting out at defensive back, right at safety, I think. What's his upside? What for him, and how do you think he's going to fit in 3-3-5?
I think he's that more traditional safety for Wisconsin. And, like you talked about, he was kind of a guy that Wisconsin liked, from very early. I think he took, 2 or 3 visits last fall to Wisconsin, obviously an in-state kid who grew up watching the program. And then he kind of burns off this 10.8 clip in the 100, and that was enough for Wisconsin to pull the trigger. It was like, hey, we can't let this kid, leave the state. And, the safety board is, evolved a little bit. They lost Cody Haddad. He flips from Wisconsin to Ohio State. So, that opened up a need there. Jameer Scott, who's already committed, he's going to play safety, but honestly, I think he could play just about every spot in the defensive backfield.
I like him as a nickel corner personally.
Sure. Yeah. You could tell me any spot in the defensive backfield. I'd say, sure, yeah, he could play there. Yeah. So, Dean is, I think, more of a traditional safety. Maybe not the highest ceiling, but Wisconsin's certainly done their homework on him. And someone that Alex Grinch came in and saw and said, I don't want to have this kid leave the state. So that offer list wasn't huge, but I think Wisconsin got him, early-ish where, had his recruitment kind of bled out and had he camped at some places. I know Minnesota was close to offering, and if he goes and camps there and runs that well, he would have picked up a handful of more offers. So you just, there's an emphasis from the staff to keep those kids in state. And, he'd be a tough kid to watch leave the state, especially, with legit track times that he was able to put out here there this spring.
Definitely. I think for me, out of the 4 guys who committed, I mean, a lot of them were a little bit out of the blue, but Cam Clark, I didn't realize that he was that high on the offensive line board for the staff. He's someone that, I'll be honest, I haven't watched as much tape of, but he seems a little bit more raw than some of these other guys who are coming in. Even Roski, people talk about him being raw just because he hasn't played against big competition. But I think Clark has a fair bit of upside, but he's going to definitely have to add some weight because he's still filling out his frame.
Yeah, I think there's been some movement at that tackle position for Wisconsin. There's some guys that they went after that they've kind of coming up short for. The kid from North Dakota who visited and picked up the offer, I thought they were kind of in line to get him, and his name's escaping me right now, but he wound up at Iowa State, and just kind of around the same time Wisconsin, picks up, its heat with Cam Clark, and they were able to land him kind of early too. So I think that they went down their board and said, okay, we need to get another tackle in here. We like Clark, big kid, 6'7", almost 300 pounds. Can he pair with Roski in this class? Roski, excuse me. And they went after him hard, and he committed, even before taking officials. And then Michigan State came in with an offer just recently, but we had our Midwest analyst Greg Smith talk to him in Detroit, and he said that he's not taking any more officials. So I think that's a good sign for the Badgers. With Blazek coming in at this time in the recruiting calendar, his board's just not super deep. So I'm not saying that Cam Clark is like a plan B or anything like that. I don't think that he's been able to build as many of those relationships and in the short amount of time that he's been there, specifically in the 2025 class. So I think there's some guys that he knew, and so that they're attacking those guys that they feel good about pretty hard. And I think it was a pretty solid get to get Cam Clark when they did, before he was able to take some official visits.
Yeah. How do you think he and Roski paired? Do you see one of them being more of a prototype left tackle, right tackle? I don't know. I kind of see them both as right tackles in a lot of ways. Now Roski is very athletic, and there is a chance he ends up on the left side. But I don't know. I guess I'd ask you, out of those two, who would you most likely envision being a future blindside protector?
Yeah, they both look like right tackles to me. But, if I had to say the two, I'd say Roski, and he's a guy that I was able to see in person. He's an athletic kid. I think any kid that you look at who's 6'8", you're like, okay, he's a right tackle. But, I think if of those two, I think he might be better suited for the left side. But, not to go off on a tangent, but I think they feel pretty good about one of the young left tackles that they have here. So he might be, manning that position for the next couple of years or so. But I think they both are in a perfect world the right tackle, but they're going to get reps at both spots, I would imagine, when they get there. And if I had to pick up the two, I'd say Roski has a better left tackle potential in comparison to Cam Clark right now.
Yeah, Bernie and I talked to Bob Doherty, the former Badger, who is his personal coach, a couple months ago over on our show. And, Doc raved about Roski's just natural athleticism and like what he can do and how he can move at his size. So, I'm interested to see how he grows in a lot of different ways. Luke Emmerich. This is another one that kind of, again, his projection is just kind of generic defensive backfield athlete, I think here. But, what do you think about Emmerich? Is he a guy that's where do you think he ends up in the defensive backfield?
Yeah, he's a dollar for Wisconsin.
Okay.
We got a chance to talk to him. That's the position they've pegged him to play. Now, in high school, he plays both sides of the ball, just about every spot that you need him to. But I think he plays that dollar position for Wisconsin. He's another guy, very similar to Grant Dean, where, on a much larger scale, I should say, he pops off, I think, a 10.68. 10.64 something in the 100, and his recruitment just explodes. I mean, it just explodes where he picked up, I don't know, probably close to 10 offers in a 2-week span, and one of them was Wisconsin. But when I was able to talk to him, he commits before taking officials. He said, look, if Wisconsin, if they ever offered me, I was going to jump on that. And he held true to that. He had visited before. He had come up for a game before, and he visited in the spring. So, he might be someone that didn't get talked about all that much because his recruitment was kind of just like in a 2 or 3 week span where he absolutely blew up and then shut things down. And then, he's locked in with Wisconsin. But, USC was there, a host of Big Ten schools, all kind of, trying to get this kid on campus for officials, and Wisconsin was able to lock him down before the month of June. I think that was pretty significant. And, 6'2", 200 pounds, and, plays that kind of coveted dollar position in that defense. So, I think that's a great get for Wisconsin because for just a couple days, he was maybe the most heavily recruited kid in the Midwest.
Yeah, that's that was pretty nuts just to see the flurry of offers and interest he was receiving right then and there. Finally, we got a slot machine out of New Jersey, Cam Miller. And like I said, I mean, he's going to end up in the slot. I know the staff sees a lot of Will Pauling in him. And John, he is very, very explosive with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, and Wisconsin's done an excellent job at that position. From Pauling through the portal, Tretch Kekahuna, which is a signing day surprise, Kyan Barry Johnson, who has been talked about at length, and then Cam Miller in this cycle. And I could tell you the staff feels just as good as they do about Miller as the guys that they've brought on campus now in the past couple cycles. So, I think that was a big draw for him too, is the success, the opportunities that you'll have in the slot there. Originally a guy who I think we have labels as a cornerback, and then we moved to an athlete, and now he's going to play slot for Wisconsin. So he brings that versatility, that skill set on both sides of the ball. As his high school coach kind of talked about that as well, of like, we're going to use him in every way we possibly can. But like you said, Matt, he's a slot guy, and that's a position of obviously importance and kind of a glamour position, that offense for Phil Longo. So they got their guy there. Now they're trying to add a boundary guy or two to kind of cap off that position in 2025.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do there and how they finish out the rest of this class, because as we know, things are going to get pickier and pickier on both ends. You're going to have less spots to fill and for the teams, but also players will be able to, especially if you're one of those real coveted guys, like take all the officials you can. It's just, how many after official season, how many guys did Wisconsin have in their 2024 class wrapped up at the end of June?
Just about
19, 20, something like that.
I think they were just about full,
Yep.
And that's really been the theme of since these June officials started is, dating back a couple of years of, hey, we're going to finish off the bulk of this class in the summer, and then if there's a hole or two to fill in the fall, we'll get a guy up there for an official and try to close him out. So I would imagine this class is going to be very similar. It's just not a Wisconsin thing. This is a college football thing of like, with the portal and limited spots, and there's a lot of wheels turning here. If you know what school you want to go to, and you're not an elite guy, you're going to have to solidify your spot there, or you might be on the outside looking in. I mean, you've already seen that, and not to get like into specifics, but like Wisconsin has filled some holes already in week 1, which have taken them. Which they've then had to adjust their calendar for week 2 and week 3. So like things happen very quickly. So if you know the team that you want to commit to, you better not drag your feet, because your spot could be taken, and you might have to go kind of down your priority list as well. So things are going to happen quick. I would imagine Wisconsin's, 90-ish% filled, by the time that we get to the start of fall camp.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. John, though, your spot is never filled with anyone but you here at BadgerBlitz TV. We appreciate you dropping by here. Make sure to subscribe to BadgerBlitz.com to get great coverage of everything Wisconsin athletics from John and Donnie and Seamus and the entire team at BadgerBlitz, and also get in on some of these message boards, because, I've been around the internet a little bit, and this might be a little bit selfish to say, but I think BadgerBlitz has the best message board anywhere in the entire college football universe. So again, thank you for tuning into BadgerBlitz TV, and we will see you next time.